There was a night. I almost walked away from it all. But then, she looked at me, and everything softened. Tier 1. The heavy blanket I wore. There was a time I used to sleep in peace, before the dishes in the sink became metaphors for everything I hadn't said. Before every little sound in the house was a reminder of who wasn't speaking. It didn't start with silence. It started with noise. Cries. Giggles. Those soft babbles that came when she was just learning to shape her world with sound. I used to lie beside her crib at night, listening to her breathe. Every sigh from her tiny lungs was a lullaby for me. We used to talk well. I used to talk. She listened with the wide-eyed devotion only toddlers give. Her head tilted just so, her curls falling like wisps of evening fog over her cheek. And sometimes she'd say a word. Not always the right word, but a word that made my whole body exhale. But then something changed. Not in an instant. That's the trick of these things. They don't arrive with trumpets. They creep. It was subtle. At first, she'd look at me and smile, but not say anything. Then, the smiles grew shorter. The eye contact wandered. And the words, they just stopped. People told me, she's just quiet. She's in her own world. Don't worry, kids do this. But my bones, they worried. My chest felt it before my mind could name it. Like I was wearing a blanket made of lead. Every morning, I'd pull that blanket over me and pretend it was warmth. But it wasn't. It was dread stitched into flannel. I began to notice the things she wouldn't notice. Her name, unacknowledged. Her toys, untouched. Her laughter, absent. And still, the world kept going. The playground was still full of noisy joy. The cartoons still played their too loud tunes. Other kids still shouted mama when they fell or giggled or wanted a snack. But not her. She looked at me like I was a shadow that stayed too long in the doorway. And yet, I clung to hope. Hope is a stubborn thing. You know, it grows in silence like moss. Soft. Hidden. But there. I began to document the quiet. A notebook by my bed filled with no words today, or looked at the cat for 10 minutes, or said, But maybe it was a yawn. I became fluent in gestures. A raised hand meant no. A blink too long meant tired. 2 taps on the cup meant juice. I was learning a new language, one built on what wasn't said, but every night, every single night. Before bed, I'd whisper the same thing to her, I love you. I'll be here. You can come back whenever you're ready. And every night, she'd look past me somewhere further. Like she was walking through a fog only she could see. I began to dream in silence, in my sleep. I'd imagine her calling me. Clear as a bell. Mama, she'd say. Just once. And I'd wake up crying, because it wasn't real. Not yet. But I still whispered. Still hoped. And I waited. Wore that heavy blanket every single day. Until the day something shifted. Tier 2. The morning without words. The morning it happened was ordinary. No birdsong. Just that gray sky hanging low like an old bedsheet stretched over the world. Rain had fallen sometime in the night enough to leave streaks on the window. Like the sky had been crying quietly while we slept. I woke up to the usual silence. That particular hush our house had worn for months. A silence not born from peace, but from absence. Like the echo of a melody you can't quite remember. She was already awake, sitting cross-legged in the middle of the living room rug, tracing circles with her finger on the fabric. The same rug she used to roll toy cars across before she forgot their names. I watched her for a minute from the hallway, watched the morning light catch in her curls, watched her lips stay shut like locked windows. And I waited, just like I had every day. But that morning, I don't know why, something inside me sank a little deeper. I walked into the kitchen and started the same breakfast I'd made every day that week. Half a banana sliced into moons. 2 pieces of toast with the crusts cut off. A small glass of apple juice. Routine is a strange comfort. It gives your hands something to do when your heart has too much to carry. When I brought the plate to her, she didn't look up. She kept drawing invisible spirals on the rug. "Here's breakfast," I said softly. She didn't respond. I placed the plate beside her and sat across from her, crossing my legs, mirroring her shape. And I waited. 1 minute. Then 2. Then 5. My mind wandered back to a time not so long ago when she would greet the plate with squeals, when she'd point and say, "Toes Nana," with that gummy enthusiasm toddlers carry in their throats. And now, nothing. That morning I felt tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind of tired that lives in your bones, in your breath, in your hope. I reached for my coffee mug, the one with the faded lettering that once said, "World's Okayest Mom." And as I lifted it, something shifted. A sound, barely audible. A tiny hum, like a forgotten radio station suddenly cutting through static. I froze. She had picked up a banana slice, held it up between her fingers like it was a question she wasn't sure how to ask. And then, without looking at me, she placed it in her mouth and chewed. My throat tightened. I didn't speak. I didn't want to startle the moment. 1 slice, then another, and then the toast. No eye contact. No words. But her body moved with intention. It was like watching a ghost remember they had hands. After she finished, she stood up, walked to the window, and placed both palms on the glass. Outside, the street was still wet. A bird hopped across a puddle. Nothing extraordinary. But to her, it seemed like everything. She turned to me then. Her eyes met mine. Not for long. Just a flicker. But it was enough to make my breath hitch. I didn't move. I didn't speak. She looked back at the window and whispered so softly I almost thought I imagined it rain. My heart cracked open like it had been waiting for that word to fit. Rain. 1 word. The first in weeks. Maybe months I'd stopped counting. The notebook beside my bed didn't matter anymore. She had said something. She had said anything. I stood slowly, knees trembling, and walked over. Stood beside her. Looked out the same window. The silence between us was still there, but softer. It wasn't cold anymore. I whispered back, "Yes, it's raining." Just like last week. Remember, she didn't reply, but her shoulders didn't tense. She stayed beside me. And in that still moment, watching the world drip outside, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the silence was shifting. That night, I tucked her in like I always did. Her stuffed bear beside her. The same one she used to call Bara. The nightlight casting warm gold onto the walls. I knelt beside her bed and said the words I had whispered every night for as long as I could remember. I love you. I'm here. You can come back whenever you're ready. And that night, as I turned to leave, she reached out. Her small hand brushed mine. She didn't speak, but her fingers curled around one of mine, gently, like a lighthouse blinking in thick fog. Not a word, but a promise. Tier 3, the birthday without balloons. It was her birthday. The third one since the silence had settled in, since words became strangers, and laughter moved out without leaving a note. I had tried to plan something simple, nothing loud, no clowns, no noise, just soft decorations. A small vanilla cake with pink icing, and 3 candles short and uneven, like tiny towers of hope. I hung up a paper garland in the living room, each loop spelling a letter, HAPPY. But the Y fell off halfway through the afternoon. It landed beside the couch and stayed there, as if even the banner had grown tired of pretending. I wrapped her present the night before. A storybook. Hardcover. Illustrations hand-painted by someone I found on Etsy. The title was The Girl Who Found Her Words. I remember tracing the letters with my thumb like I was praying they'd transfer into her somehow. The room smelled faintly of cinnamon. Outside, the wind moved through the trees with the gentleness of someone tiptoeing through an old memory. That morning, I put the book on the table beside her cake. No party hats. Just a quiet room. A hopeful mother. And a girl sitting cross-legged on the rug, watching the shadows shift on the wall. She didn't react when I brought out the cake. Not even when I lit the candles. The flickering light danced across her cheeks, but her eyes stayed far away like she was watching something I couldn't see. I knelt down beside her and whispered, "Happy birthday, sweetheart. You're turning 6 today." She blinked. No smile. No words. But her hand reached out slowly toward the candles. And just before the flames bowed to her breath, I whispered, "Make a wish, baby." She didn't close her eyes. Didn't grin with the excitement most children do. But she exhaled. And the candles went out like stars being softly hushed. The room felt sacred, not joyful, not loud, but holy in its own quiet way. I cut the cake and placed a small slice in front of her. She didn't touch it. She just stared at it like it held a secret she wasn't ready to unlock. And then, as if prompted by a memory only she could feel, she stood up and walked to the window. It had started to snow. Tiny flakes, slow and dreamy, drifting like feathers from the sky. She pressed her hand to the glass again, just like she had the day she said rain. But this time, she said nothing. And yet, I could feel her seeing it. Not just looking, seeing. I walked to the kitchen, wiped icing from my hand, poured 2 glasses of milk out of habit more than hope. When I came back, she was sitting on the couch, feet tucked under her, book in lap. The storybook. The girl who found her words. My breath caught. I hadn't seen her pick it up, hadn't seen her climb onto the couch. But there she was, fingers tracing the painted cover, just like I had done the night before. She didn't open it, just held it, and I didn't dare break the moment. Instead, I sat at the edge of the couch, left a cushion between us. The silence stretched wide, but it wasn't empty. It was full, like a quiet lake under a full moon still on the surface, but holding entire storms beneath. She leaned her head gently against the back cushion, eyes half closed, still holding the book, and in the softest voice, barely there, she whispered, "Story." I froze. Had I imagined it, I turned slowly. Her eyes met mine, and this time, they stayed. "You want a story?" I asked, carefully. She nodded. Once. Small. Delicate. Like a petal falling. I opened the book with trembling hands, started to read the first page. My voice was low, almost breaking like someone walking barefoot through snow. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who couldn't find her words. She leaned closer, not touching, but her shoulder hovered near mine, close enough to warm. As I turned the pages, her eyes stayed wide, drinking in the watercolor illustrations, as if each one was a memory being returned. By the end of the story, she was asleep, head resting on my arm, book still in her lap. Her breath was soft, steady, but before she drifted off completely, she murmured so faint, I almost missed it, Mama. Not loud, not confident, but clear. One word. One world. My eyes filled, but I didn't let the tears fall. I just whispered back, I'm right here. That night, I didn't move her. I sat there for hours, just letting her rest, letting the weight of the moment soak into my bones. The birthday without balloons became the birthday I'd remember forever. Not because of the cake, not because of the snow, but because of a single, fragile word, Mama. And in that word, a beginning. Tier 4, the crayons. She never used. There's a box of crayons still sitting on the shelf in her room. Not a single one is broken. Not a single paper wrapper peeled. It's the kind of box that holds silence, not color. I bought them one Saturday morning after she said she wanted to draw the sky. Her exact words were, The one with the pink edges and the purple middle. Like when the sun is deciding whether to stay. And I remember standing in the art supply store, thinking how wild it was that a child could describe something that took me decades to notice. I picked the fanciest pack they had: pastels, neons, earth tones, all organized like promises. When I handed them to her, she didn't say thank you. She just looked at me, then quietly placed them on her shelf. She never touched them again. I told myself she was saving them for a special moment, that maybe she was one of those kids who needed the right day to begin something. But the days kept passing. Spring turned into summer, then fall, then winter. And still no drawings. There were no skies with pink edges taped to the fridge. No purple middles hung on her bedroom wall. No crayon smudges on her fingertips. One evening, after she'd fallen asleep, I sat in her room. I picked up the crayon box and opened it slowly, like I was opening a letter she'd never sent. And that's when it hit me. These weren't just crayons. They were something she didn't yet know how to use. They represented something she wasn't ready to express. Maybe her silence wasn't laziness or forgetfulness. Maybe it was grief. The kind of grief that makes color feel loud. The kind of grief that whispers not yet. I remember asking her gently a few days later, "Do you still want to draw that sky?" She looked at me, and instead of answering, she crawled into my lap. She rested her head just under my chin and whispered, "It's still in my mind." That night, I didn't ask any more questions. I didn't push. I didn't plan another art day. I just held her. Because sometimes, holding is the only way to color someone's world without making a single mark. The crayons are still there, and some days I wonder if she even remembers why. But I've stopped wondering when she'll use them. Because I've realized something. Healing has its own calendar. It doesn't follow birthdays, or seasons, or even good intentions. It waits. It watches. And one day, without warning, she might reach for the box. She might peel the wrapper from the lavender crayon. She might draw a sky so full of softness that even pain feels welcome. But until then, the crayons will wait, and so will I. Tier 5, when healing drew. Her first line. It didn't happen on a holiday. Not on a birthday or an anniversary. Not on one of those days that carries expectations like gifts wrapped in invisible ribbons. It was just a Tuesday. The kind that passes by without asking permission. The kind that leaves no footprints. Only quiet. I had just come home from the grocery store, bag still resting on the kitchen tiles. The wind outside was whispering against the window panes like it had something sacred to say. She was sitting at the table, knees tucked up, her little hands resting on the surface like she was waiting for a storm to pass. And then I saw it. One crayon, lavender, pressed softly against a blank sheet of paper. No announcement. No fanfare. Just a line. Wobbly. Curved. Barely a whisper of color. But there it was. Her first line. I didn't say a word. I didn't want to scare it away. That single motion, her hand sliding across the page, was louder than any words we'd spoken in weeks. It was like watching spring peek through frost, like seeing the first bird return after a long, impossible winter. She didn't look up, but she knew I saw. Her shoulders relaxed just a little. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but I noticed. Because I'd been studying her silence like scripture. I sat across from her and just stayed. Didn't take my coat off. Didn't put the groceries away. I just let the moment wrap around us like a quilt stitched from all the days we thought would never come. And then she drew a second line, and a third, each one softer than the last, like she was afraid of waking something fragile inside herself. She didn't speak, not in the way we use words, but her hands told me everything. I'm ready, they said. Not for everything, but for this. Later that night, after she had gone to bed, I walked into her room and saw the crayon box open finally. The wrappers had begun to unravel, like they were shedding a skin that had grown too tight. And there, on the desk, lay her drawing. It wasn't a sky, not the kind she described that day in the store. No pink edges, no purple middles, just two small hands, drawn in lavender and gold, holding each other beneath a soft, undefined horizon. It wasn't perfect. The proportions were off. The colors smudged where her fingers must have trembled. But it was whole. And it was hers. I framed that drawing, hung it in the hallway where the sun kisses it every morning. Not because it's a masterpiece, but because it's a map. A map back to her. A map I almost thought we'd never find. People ask me sometimes how I knew she was healing. What was the sign? What was the moment? And I always think of that line, that first soft curve on paper, that lavender whisper of courage. Healing doesn't knock. It doesn't wait for you to feel ready. It arrives in the middle of a quiet Tuesday, with a crayon and a child who once forgot how to speak through color. Remembering. I still keep the rest of the crayons in the box. She's moved on to paints now. Markers, chalk, ink. But I keep the lavender ones separate. In my drawer. Next to the passports. The birth certificates. The documents that prove we exist. Because that crayon proved something else. It proved she was finding her way back. One line at a time. If you're holding on for a moment like that, don't worry. It won't be loud. It won't come with confetti. But one day on a Tuesday, or maybe a Thursday, healing will draw its first line, and it'll be enough.